Good morning. The commission will go on the record in approximately 1 minute. Good morning and welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission. We are on the record in case number 9353. This is the Commission's annual review of electric reliability. The utility companies all made electric reliability filings back on April 1st, and we had the opportunity to review them along with the compilation put together by staff and comments that were received by both the Office of People's Counsel and Montgomery County. Overall, the results indicate that this is one of the best years of reliability under this new regime that was promulgated back in 2012. So we're going to hear trends that we're moving in the right direction in terms of all the metrics, including Katie and Safey and Sadie and other metrics. Although what happened last night in many of our regions demonstrates that we're not out of the woods yet. I know that in the Baltimore Gas Electric Service territory, we had over 10,000 outages last evening, substantial outages in Pepco. I was on a train earlier today that got stuck. There ended up being a 7-hour delay between Baltimore and New Carrollton, which is typically a 30-minute ride, because of downed trees, which crashed into the wires, thereby preventing train travel along the most heavily congested rail corridor in the United States. It's a stark reminder that our infrastructure may not be up to snuff if we can't get the commerce and the people of this country moving, and they need reliability. They need reliable power. They need the ability to ensure that rights of way, whether it be roads or rails, are clear of any danger trees or hazard trees that may exist along the way. Fortunately, I know the crews of the utilities have worked throughout the evening to ensure that our outages have been minimized, but I would not be surprised whatsoever if the events of last evening are ultimately categorized as a major outage event. I would be interested to hear from the utilities that suffered outages last night and early into this morning, which would be very appropriate in light of today's subject. In terms of run of show today, we will hear from the staff who put together a very robust compilation of the reports that were filed, and then we'll hear from our utilities. Notably, this is the last year that we'll hear from the Choptank Electric Cooperative, as they are now a member-regulated cooperative. I'll pause there, and at this point, if any of my colleagues seek recognition, I see none. So we'll move to the presentation by the Commission staff, led by our Chief Engineer, Mr. John Borkowski. Good morning, Chief Borkowski.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Again, John Borkowski for staff, and we have a number of staff members that are participating in today's hearing. For the engineering division, we have Samrit Durrari, and Samri took the lead in coordinating staff's reports, so thank you to Samri. And we also have other engineering division members who are responsible for various report sections: Chris Lowe, Roger Austin, DeAndre Wilson, and Craig Taborski. And also for the Staff Council Division, we were assisted by Catherine McErlin, Mike Dean, and Jim Greger. Now, before we proceed into staff's presentation, I wanted to note that staff identified a few errors in our filed report, none of which had an impact on the overall conclusions and recommendations, and therefore I will not cover them in detail today. I apologize for those errors, and we will be making an errata following after today's hearing. With that, Chris Lowe and I will be the primary presenters today, and our lead staff counsel today is Catherine McMerlin. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Lowe, who is the staff leader of the Customer Perception Survey Work Group, to discuss the work group final report that was filed on May 25th. Chris?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Chris Lowe for staff. So during the Reliability Standards for 2020 to 2023 hearing in 2018, staff opined about the lack of consistencies in survey methodology among electric utilities. And the Commission also observed that comparing customer perception results between utilities is difficult, as each company administers their own survey with their own questioning technique and rating system. Although this customer surveys in the past cycles demonstrated strong satisfaction scores across the board, the survey responses and ratings cannot be directly compared to each other. So in response to these concerns, in order number 89056, the Customer Perception Survey Work Group was assembled on September 25th, 2020. From September 2020 through May 2021, the work group discussed various topics related to customer perception and survey methodology. After a series of discussions, the electric utilities consented to question categories for overall company perception, electric service reliability, vegetation management, customer communications, and customer service, containing 30 total survey question themes, some with multiple sub-themes in those question categories. In addition, the electric utilities agreed to implement a uniform rating scale that would facilitate a better comparison of the company's survey performance. And on May 25th, 2021, a consensus final report was filed. Customer perception surveys are required by COMAR 20.50.12.14 every 4 years. Customer feedback in this perception surveys is based on a customer's experience without the knowledge of overall system performance or comparisons with other customer experiences. The next slide, it highlights the work group proposed survey question categories. And our final report provides more details on these questionnaires, themes, sub-themes, and associated rating scales that will be included in the next surveys. In general, a 5 or 6 point rating scale will be used for these questions where applicable. For example, a customer perception question will display a satisfaction scale, a range of answer options from very satisfied all the way down to very dissatisfied, or you can simply answer, I do not know. So a uniform rating scale has to be chosen for all these questions among the electric utilities. Now I'm going to go over these question categories. First, the overall company perception questions, themes that concern customer experience with the electric utility in general. These questions provide a non-biased response about the level of satisfaction and dissatisfaction with electric service. In electric service reliability category, this survey questions measure the customer satisfaction level of the electric utilities on providing reliable electric service. Also, the utilities are rated on their performance, for example, when it comes to providing electric service during storms or on clear days. And the customers are asked to rate their experiences when sustained interruptions or momentary interruptions occur during storms or on clear days. The work group also develops questions that measure customer awareness of the vegetation management policy in Maryland, and they are asked to rate their satisfaction level with their utilities' performance on different types of tree trimming scenarios. Next, the customer communication related questions are designed to measure customer communication preferences. And customers are asked to rate the utility's performance when it comes to providing accurate restoration estimates during storms or on clear days. Also, in the event of severe weather, it is important that the utilities proactively communicate with special medical needs customers. So a series of questions is designed to measure customer satisfaction levels regarding the company's performance on providing outage information for these vulnerable individuals with special medical needs. Last, we have customer service. These questions measure customer satisfaction levels related to customer service representative CSR performance and responsiveness to customer needs. These questions are concerned with customer experience when they're calling the utility in different types of situations. For example, customers are asked to express their satisfaction level in regard to their problem or inquiry was resolved by CSR, or the CSR responsiveness when calling about an outage, power outage during storm or non-storm situations. While the workgroup developed these questions, themes, and sub-themes, the utilities may take some editorial changes to the questions to have a better survey dynamics, as long as the approach to each question proposed by the workgroup is consistent with the intent of the question and utilize a common rating scale. And staff believes that the workgroup has accomplished Commission's directive with the goal of developing a core set of survey question themes, sub-themes, and uniform rating scales as discussed in our final report. Now the electric utilities are expected to begin their next customer perception surveys in the fourth quarter of 2021, with the final result in time for filing to the Commission by April 1st, 2022. If the Commission agrees and has no further requests, we respectfully recommend that the workgroup be disbanded. But before I'm turning back over to our chief, the workgroup and I are available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe, and thank you to the work group for putting together that report. Do the commissioners have questions on the report? Thank you, Mr. Lowe.
Okay, since there are no questions, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, this slide shows, by the way, thank you, Chris, for your leadership on that work group. This slide shows an overall performance summary for calendar year 2020. And regarding COMAR reliability and service quality standards, of the 11 performance standards, 8 were met or exceeded by all 6 companies in calendar year 2020, as indicated by the green cells in this chart. And I will focus today only on COMAR reliability and service quality standards that were not met, as indicated by the red cells in this chart. So first, regarding multiple device activation or MDA standards, COMAR requires reporting for the number of protective devices that activated 5 or more times during a 12-month period. And these protective devices should not experience 5 or more activations during a subsequent 12-month reporting period, after allowing for one 12-month period for the electric company to implement remediation measures. In 2020, out of the 6 electric companies, only BGE failed to meet the MDA standard, and for only 1 device. And I will discuss details, more details of BGE's MDA failure and their corrective action plan, also known as a CAP, when I get to the next slide. But before I get to the next slide, I also want to cover porous performing feeder standards, otherwise known as PPF. And in 2020, all electric companies reported a PPF with the exception of Chop Tank. And Potomac Edison reported a repeat PPF in that the Little Orleans feeder was a porous performing feeder for 3 consecutive years, and therefore PE failed the PPF standard in 2020. And I will be discussing more details of Potomac Edison's PPF failure and their CAP when I get to the next slide. And finally, regarding the periodic equipment inspection standard, each electric company is required by COMAR to adopt and follow written O&M procedures for the inspection of their electric plant. As described in staff's report, all the electric companies except for SHMECO passed this standard in calendar year 2020. And I will discuss those details of SHMECO's periodic equipment inspections cap on the next slide. So if I can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So as far as staff conclusions, as discussed earlier, 8 of 11 COMAR reliability and service quality performance standards were met or exceeded in calendar year 2020. For those standards that were missed, caps are required. And staff concluded that Potomac Edison's cap for missing the PPF standard was acceptable. This particular feeder, has been a problem feeder, and PE has pursued a number of remediation methods in the past on this feeder without success. What the company is doing now is pursuing 5,000 feet of undergrounding for 2 different feeder segments in Washington and Allegheny counties that should be completed by December 31st of this year. Staff met with Potomac Edison on April 13th, and we reviewed Potomac Edison's remediation plan in detail. And staff found Potomac Edison's cap to be reasonable, since there appears to really be no other less costly options that would be similarly effective. So next, staff concluded that BGE's cap for missing the MDA standard was also acceptable. BGE identified a fuse on feeder 7274 out of Ellicott City Substation as a repeat device from the calendar year 2018. And BGE noted back in 2018 that vegetation management was one of the significant outage causes for the MDA. And as a result, they performed a lot of focused hotspot trimming. And they also installed some reclosing that's capable of sectionalizing the device in question in early 2019. However, even after the implementation of remedial measures in the past, device activations continued to occur, which led the company to pursue selective undergrounding that has already been completed. Staff found BG's cap to be reasonable, and preliminary results since the undergrounding has been completed indicate that BG's cap has also been effective. So next, SHMECO reported missing the inspection of 44 hydraulic reclosers in 2020. The company began to replace these reclosers as part of a multi-year plan to upgrade its hydraulic line recloser units with new electronic vacuum interrupter line reclosers. But the company was forced to halt its replacement program due to manufacturer issues, which we discuss in the report in a little bit more detail. SHMECO was then required to reschedule testing of the 44 hydraulic reclosers that should have been replaced. And as the following of staff's report, they had finished testing 30 of those units, and the remaining units were scheduled to be completed by June 30th, which would complete SHMECO's corrective action plan. Now, staff does note that SHMECO did not formally file in their report a cap, but nevertheless, staff concluded that SHMECO's proposed periodic equipment inspection actions to complete remaining inspection work by June 30th is acceptable as a cap. And next, BG and Choptank requested stays of enforcement due to COVID-19 that were approved in 2020 by the engineering division, and staff reviewed both BG and Choptank's records and identified that all work related to the stays of enforcement have been completed. And next, in the BGE April 1st filing in this case, the company requested consideration of COMAR revisions to both the MDA standard and the periodic equipment inspection standard. And staff notes that the historical precedent for considering the next cycle of 2024 to 2027 safety and SAIDI standards is the summer of 2022. And staff concludes that that would be an ideal time to consider any other COMAR revisions, such as those proposed by BGE and other stakeholders, including staff who may want to propose other COMAR revisions. And finally, as mentioned in the report, the Vegetation Management Cost Work Group reached consensus on all-in vegetation management costs per mile definitions. And staff concludes that this has been effective in helping compare utility vegetation management costs. And also, as Chris Lowe noted earlier, the Customer Perception Survey Work Group reached consensus on survey questions and a rating system for utility surveys that staff concludes will be effective in aligning future electric company surveys for comparison purposes. So with that, can we go to the next slide? Okay. Therefore, in summary, staff has the following recommendations: approve Potomac Edison, BGE, and Schmecko's caps and refrain from any penalties. We also recommend the Commission note that BGE and Chop Tank stay of enforcements issued in 2020 due to COVID-19 are completed and no longer active. We also request that the Commission approve the Customer Perception Survey Work Group report and direct the electric companies to implement the recommendations from the report in their next required customer perception surveys, which they will begin at the end of this year with a following due April 1st, 2022. And also, if the Commission has no further requests for either the Customer Perception Survey Work Group or the Vegetation Management Cost Work Group, these work groups should be disbanded. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally, staff also recommends that the Commission, in any subsequent order associated with this proceeding, modify a previous requirement contained in order number 88573. And this requirement is for electric companies to file their next cycle reliability reports for 2024-2027 using only the 2.5 beta method. The previous order directed the companies to file these type of next cycle reliability reports using both the 2.5 beta method and also the MOE, or major outage event exclusion method, since at the time of the order, we were considering a transition from one method to the other method at the time, but this is no longer the case since we have adopted 2.5 beta method for safety and SAIDI performance. So we would request some clarification in the order that reflects that change. And also, if the Commission agrees, staff recommends that the Commission direct staff to convene a work group, preferably in the fourth quarter of this year, to consider any proposed COMAR reliability and service quality changes so we can bring them before the Commission next summer when we have our beginning discussion on next cycle safety and SAIDI standards. So with that, last slide, please. Okay, with that, our presentation is concluded, and we would be glad to address any questions.
Thank you, Chief Borkel. As you noted indirectly, our 6 utilities here are either in the top quartile or maybe top decile by some of the markers. So I do think congratulations is in order with respect to all of our utilities in hitting these goals. A question that appears throughout the engineering division's report, however, is at this point, reaching these successes, do the utilities in Maryland continue to strive to improve, notwithstanding the fact that some of these metrics are in the top decile? Or do we maintain at this point? There is a question of whether continuing to improve would be cost effective. For instance, if it would cost an extra $1 million to reach 10 additional customers during a weather event? Or is there diminishing returns, and do we just sort of call it a day and instruct our utilities to maintain the status quo going forward with no need to squeeze out that last, most difficult, most expensive 1%? And so this isn't a question for you or your team, Chief, but I would like to hear responses from each of the utilities later on today, whether or not they should continue to improve or if they should maintain. And I recognize that we always strive to improve there, but we need to be realistic, especially if the ratepayers are going to be paying for these costs. And as we've seen, both in the engineering division's report and each of the individual reports that were filed, that this is very expensive and this is borne on the backs of the ratepayers. I thank you and your team for putting together a very, very, very comprehensive summary. I yield to my colleagues.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Borkowski, a couple questions about SMECO's failure to meet its periodic inspection requirements and the standards there. It almost sounds like staff is saying, well, they planned on replacing them. They didn't get to it, but that's a justifiable excuse for not meeting the inspection standard. Can you help me with that? Because that's what it sounds like to me. Tell me I'm wrong, or tell me you're not saying that. Tell me something about that, because that's what my ear hears from you.
Okay, thank you for the question, Commissioner O'Donnell. I feel like, and I used to have experience in maintenance, so I guess I'm a little bit close to the situation. In general,
So did I, Chief.
yeah, in general, if you're replacing equipment and you've got upcoming inspections, you would try to replace the equipment before the inspections are due. That way, you don't have to go through the inspection and testing. And I think that was the plan all along from SMECO, the way I perceived it. And basically that plan got disrupted. So then the company just needed some more time to do the backlog of work. So I found it personally, and others can disagree, but I found it on behalf of staff to be a reasonable explanation. And that's the conclusion in our report.
So shouldn't the company have had a contingency plan if they were going to fail to meet their replacement timeline to complete the inspections in a timely manner? Because when I was a maintenance supervisor, it was a cardinal sin to not meet your periodic inspection requirements, and that's the world that I grew up in, both the military and in the civilian world. And we've had this discussion with BG&E before. We've had this discussion, and it seems to me like staff is kind of really understanding about this, and I'm not. So I want you to help me understand why staff is seems to be understanding about this.
I really don't have anything else to add other than the explanation that I gave you. I feel like they were trying to execute a plan and they were disrupted. The question about the contingency plan, I have to admit I hadn't considered that question, and maybe the company can address that when they come up later.
All right, fair enough. Let me ask you one more question. We're requesting the commission approve the corrective action plan from SMECO, but they don't have one. How do we approve something they don't have?
Well, I feel like staff has concluded that although they did not use the exact wording, posturing this as a corrective action plan, for all intent, staff accepted it as a corrective action plan.
Aren't they required to file one?
Well, when we say required to file, they're required to put it into describe it in their April 1st report. And they did not describe it, in terms of missing a standard and a corrective action plan for missing a standard. I do think, this is a lesson going forward for the utilities. But I don't think we were prepared to take a heavy-handed approach here.
Fair enough. Just maybe a lesson for staff too. This commissioner is always going to be tough on missing periodic inspections. It's an inexcusable failure to meet the standards in my view of the world. So thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. And maybe the company would be prepared to elucidate later. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. At this point, we will transition to hear from the three Exelon utilities, including BGE, Pepco, and Delmarva. If the representatives can please turn on their cameras, and our host advisor will bring up your presentation.
Good morning, Your Honor. This is Bev Sikora. BGE doesn't have a presentation, but we do have comments.
Thank you, Ms. Sikora. And if you are able to provide any update regarding the outages of early this morning, that would be helpful and appreciated.
Yes, either Mr. Apte or Mr. Summerson will be doing that. Okay. I'll start off by apologizing. Of course, the landscaping people in my development decided to show up this morning, so there may be some leaf blowing and lawn mowing in the background. Good morning, Commissioners. Chairman Stanek, Beverly Sikora on behalf of BGE. With me today, I have Ajit Apte, who is the Vice President of Technical Services, and Corey Summerson, who is Director of Engineering for BGE. Before I turn it over to them, I do want to thank staff for its thorough review again this year of our report and the information. We do appreciate it. They definitely are an integral part of our continual improvement efforts. We do want to learn, we do want to improve. Also want to thank staff for the leadership that they provided this year in both of the working groups, the customer perception survey working group and the working group to develop more consistent reporting for the vegetation costs. I think both of those will, the results of those working groups will definitely aid us going forward to make sure that, the commission has the information that it needs to evaluate our performances. With that, I will turn the mic over to Mr. Apte, who will have a.
Thank you, Ms. Cora. Can everyone hear me clearly, please?
Yes, we can, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Stanek and Commissioners. I'm Ajit Apte, VP of Technical Services at BGE, and here on behalf of BGE leadership team to share highlights of BGE's 2020 performance. Last year was a year filled with unprecedented challenges brought on by the pandemic and other significant events. The world, our country, and Maryland were greatly impacted by these events. Many of us experienced anxiety, fear, despair, sadness, and many other emotions. During these very challenging times, our communities rely on basic fundamental services provided by first responders, healthcare workers, including local utilities, to keep us safe and provided for. We are very proud of how our BGE team responded to the needs of our community during these uncertain times. Last year, my colleague, Ms. Carol Dodson, described the challenges we faced under the required COVID-19 protocols to keep our employees safe so that we could continue to safely and reliably deliver electricity to our customers. We at BGE would like to acknowledge again our appreciation of how the Commission responded to the utilities' request to create a simplified inspection and maintenance waiver process, which BGE did utilize last year. BGE requested the waiver of 7 preventive maintenance inspections, and BGE completed all 7 of these by end of January 2021. Overall, BGE's performance for 2020 was very good. We met all the reliability standards and regulations except one, which Mr. Summerson will review after my remarks. BGE's safety performance for 2020 was 0.77, which was our second best ever. Likewise, BGE's SAIDI performance of 77 minutes was also its second best ever. BGE continues to strive for greater reliability for all our customers. As everyone knows, these numbers, even though very good, are averages. BGE has turned its attention towards smaller pockets of customers for reliability improvements. As we are moving into an era where more of our customers will be working from home and relying on electric vehicles for their transportation needs, the reliability of the grid becomes even more important. The last point I want to make is about our continuing efforts to improve on our performance on inspection standards. I want to re-emphasize again what Ms. Dodson talked about last year. BGE is committed to having a culture where all employees know the importance of inspections and maintenance. The leadership teams responsible for scheduling, performing, and tracking our work are keenly aware of the need to keep their feet on the pedal so that we don't backslide, and that this work is a collaborative effort across multiple functions, and that it is done on time and recorded in the systems. The executive leadership team is focused on supporting the teams, keeping them informed, and holding them and ourselves accountable for this important work. We do not take this lightly. As far as last night's storms, our crews continue to work to ensure that the services are restored as fast and as safely as possible. Mr. Summerson will provide more comments in his testimony as he speaks. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Summerson for his testimony. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Stanek and Commissioners. Can you hear me?
Sir, we can hear you fine.
All right, great. Thank you. Again, I'm Corey Summerson. I'm the Director of Distribution Engineering for BGE. As Mr. Apte mentioned, we did miss the one standard, the repeat MDA, and Chief Engineer, Mr. Barkowski, I think did a good job discussing the events surrounding that. I think one of the things I do want to focus on is, we had an initial plan. It was highly related to trying to do the hotspot trimming to resolve the issues with tree coverage. Once we saw that that was not adequate enough, we continued to have outages. We did come in with a further plan, a more drastic plan, by doing a selective undergrounding job that finished in August of last year. And unfortunately, before the job had been finished, right, the area had reached the point of being an MDA again and being a repeat MDA. As Mr. Barkowski pointed out, since the outage, which it's almost been a year since the job was completed, we've only had one outage that has affected 13 customers out of the 73 that were supplied by that line fuse. So with that, we will continue to monitor to make sure that the reliability is consistent for those customers supplied in that area. The next thing I wanted to correct was some misleading information concerning BGE's RPI program. In rereading BGE's testimony on the RPI, I can see where staff interpreted our testimony that the RPI program was totally completed. In fact, BGE stopped engineering any new projects under RPI, but there are still 2 projects time of filing that were not completed. One of those has been completed this year, and the second one is currently been redesigned and is currently being permitted with the county and will not be completed until early 2022. I also want to note that OPC had an estimate of BGE's number of feeders at 275 in their analysis of the poorest performing feeders. Just wanted to correct that. Actually, BGE's number of feeders, 4 kV and 13 kV, is closer to 1,350. Going back to the subject of RPI, I did want to comment on OPC's suggestion that the ending of this program is an indication that the point of diminishing returns have been reached on BGE's reliability spend. And that kind of gets back to some of the questions that Chairman Stanek asked as well. So in our report this year, we explained that we were transitioning from the large area of whole feeder reliability solutions to focus on more of the smaller pockets of customers with poor reliability. And this does align with what OPC said when it talked about SEMI being an important metric, because customers experiencing multiple interruptions in a given year are unlikely to be receiving the reliable service that the General Assembly sought to achieve by enacting the Maryland Electricity Service Quality and Reliability Act, is what OPC quoted in their statement. And so this is exactly the point BGE is making about concentrating greater efforts on smaller pockets of poor reliability than trying to go after larger solutions. I'd like to liken it, so actually Ms. Sikora came up with this analogy. So the journey of reliability is similar to the storm restoration process. And so with the storm restoration process, the first thing you address is obvious safety issues that resulted from the storm. And from there, you move to the jobs that affect the largest number of customers to have that greater impact. But still, once those have been resolved, you do have to go to the smaller jobs that restore customers in smaller numbers to finish out the storm. And so that is similar to the reliability journey of, hey, going after large pocket areas, affecting greater numbers, but at the end, you know, all customers should be receiving good reliability. And as Mr. Apte pointed out, as we come out of this pandemic, you know, good reliability for all our customers is going to be even more important. One other thing I wanted to note was our efforts in improving the response to down wires being guarded by first responders. We know this is an important standard for the Commission, and at BGE, we improved our processes, adjusted our staffing requirements to ensure that BGE's performance, which last year was at 99%, was successful for our first responding agencies because of the importance of this work. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge the good work that staff has done leading different working groups. First, there was the poorest performing feeder standard, the vegetation management costs, the customer survey, and we appreciate the fact that Chief Warkowski, talked about this being an opportune window to take another look at some other things. As for BGE, we would like a review of the multiple device activation and preventive maintenance standards, because BGE believes that it's important that the standards be crafted to inform the Commission and the utilities as to where our efforts should be directed to best serve our customers. Also, that we agree with staff that for the 2024 to 2027 reliability standards, that only the 2.5 beta projection should be provided. So going back to a question by Chairman Stanek about the storm, and I think we ended up somewhere around 20,000 customers interrupted, and I think we're below 4,000 customers still out, and we'll be, with 200 jobs still remaining. This will go on well into the evening today for restoration. with this storm being a late night storm, and I haven't seen the numbers yet or the breakdown, for the MED consideration, it really is midnight to midnight. And so depending on when the outages actually occurred, some of them could have been attributed to yesterday, and some of them could be attributed to today. And so it really is, the MED threshold is a SAIDI calculation. So it's the level of SAIDI that's there for the outages of that day from midnight to midnight. And so we won't know whether or not we hit that threshold for either day until a review has been done of the outages, doing the corrections to make sure it's accurate, and then the calculation will be done. So this may be one of those storms that doesn't hit the threshold, even though if it all happened on one day, it might have. Let's see. Just wanted to make sure that I hit the question there on striving to improve. I think I did hit quite a bit of that with the fact that we feel that all customers do need to have good reliability, and we are going to be focusing on the smaller pockets. The next couple of years are reliability metrics, the standards, the minimum standards are pretty aggressive as they go into 22 and 2023. And so certainly, we will still be striving to provide greater reliability for our customers. And as Mr. Apte pointed out, right, the dynamics are changing for the customers, right? As electrification comes on, there's going to be, even though overall load may be going flat, but in some areas, as different businesses electrify their fleets, right, it's going to be new load requirements, and we're going to see new reliability challenges that brings on, and also bringing on more distributed energy resources, solar onto the system is going to provide more challenges for the decade to come. So with that is the end of my comments or BGE's comments. Turn it back to questions, or if you'd like it to move on to PHI.
Thank you, Mr. Summerson. Thank you for your update as well. I understand that under Title 20, Subtitle 52, the determination of a major outage event is the lesser of, I believe it's 10,000 customers or 10% of customer base. So it will be interesting to see how the midnight divide either results in a major event or not. Just one question for you and your team. With respect to the recommendation to improve the standards, are you seeking the Commission's blessing to institute a work group? Obviously, there's no restriction on the parties working with staff to improve regulations where either staff or the utilities see fit. But I'm trying to gain clarification if you're seeking something formal.
Yeah, Mr. Stanek, we are seeking a formal. We feel that's the best method to get a good review of what all the utilities are thinking on how we best should move forward with these. I do want to clarify a little bit on a major event versus an MED, and my apologies if I missed your interpretation earlier with your first question. This certainly will not hit a major event threshold for BGE. That's 10,000 customers out would hit that, and this will not get anywhere close to that severity. What I was referring to was more of the major event day, which is part of the 2.5 beta analysis.
Thank you. I was talking about MOEs, but you're right. You were talking about MEDs. I appreciate the clarification there. Do my colleagues have questions? Oh, Ms.
Can I
Sikora.
just also clarify the major outage event standard is actually the lesser of 10% or 100,000 customers. So for BGE, it is the 100,000. If we had to do a report for 10,000 customers, I'd be a full-time reporter, writer probably.
The benefits of being a larger utility. Customers, approximately 1.3 million, is that right?
Yes,
Correct.
that's.
Okay, thank you. Do my colleagues have questions for BGE? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Summerson, I wanted to ask you about something that you said. Mr. Apty talked about the executive leadership team continuing to be committed to communicating down through the ranks the importance of meeting preventive maintenance standards or periodic inspections, if you will. But I heard you mention that you may want to revisit that standard in the work group that you just talked about with the chairman. In what direction do you want to, are you intending to request a loosening of those standards, or what are you talking about?
I think there's a couple different perspectives, and I appreciate the question, Mr. Chairman O'Donnell. I'm sorry, Commissioner O'Donnell. I think one is recognition that different utilities have different challenges when it comes to the amount of maintenance and the amount of data that's there. So greater clarification on some of the, sometimes there are customers that refuse access, right? And so we do have an exception clause there where, hey, if the customer requests, and we had this with the pandemic as well, where the city was not, they had asked us not to perform some maintenance until this year because it involved their project involved with the water treatment plant. And so BGE agreed that, okay, that should wait until next year to do the maintenance because of the contingency of them being single sourced for the outage that would be required. And so there are times that you have these different exceptions and better clarifications of theirs, I guess better appreciation of what we do with data errors and how that's resolved. And then also, to be frankly, is the vast number of inspections that are planned is different for each utility, and what is a appropriate measure.
So BG&E met its standard, and yet I hear you talking about you need relief in this area. And so I'm confused, and it sounds like mixed messages from the executive leadership team presentation to your presentation in this regard. I'm really confused by this point.
Again, I think it's a lot of this is greater clarification about everything that involves the inspection cycles and everything else. We perform over 60,000 maintenance inspections each year, and that's a lot, right? And so there's a lot of data, there's a lot of recording that happens with that, and so we're looking to say, what is it, is it realistic for every year going forward that all that will be 100% accurate? Is that what the level of effort for documentation, everything else, is that realistic for year in, year out, that everything is going to be exact for 100% of 60,000 plus inspections?
Well, BG&E received an enforcement action, as you know, in this regard. And the reason they did had nothing to do with the concerns you're talking about here right now, something very different. And so just know that this commissioner, because this is something I highly value because it can save lives, literally save lives, or maybe potentially cause a loss of life if not performed to a high and exacting standard, is something that I'm going to be looking at very, very closely. So discussion, fair enough. Expenses, fair enough. But just loosening the standards just because it's too hard, not fair enough. But thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Understood. Thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell, I'd also add that, I thought that the staff's vegetation management cost working group this past year was very valuable to get the utilities together to talk about making sure that we were consistent. And I think that could be a good thing with not only the inspections, just to make sure that, you know, we're all on the same page in terms of you know, how we're reporting and what we're reporting. Because again, it could be that, and again, absolutely agree 100% that there needs to be a, you know, an absolute focus on meeting our inspection cycles and all that. But again, maybe just making sure that we're all being consistent, we're speaking the same language, because
Yeah.
you know, I think we thought that was the case with the vegetation management costs, but when we really sat down and talked to each other, we realized, you know, there were some differences.
No, that's a good point, and I certainly, you know, just speaking for myself, I can't speak for the commission, but speaking for myself, I have no desire to tell the utilities what they need to inspect or what the periodicity of those inspections are. That's your job to manage. It's the company's job to manage that. But not meeting those standards once they're committed to is something that I view as inexcusable in most instances. So that's just how I view it. So, and I wanted to communicate that, not just to BG&E, but to others who may be listening or who are listening. That's how I view it. So
And
thank you.
Commissioner, we completely understand that part, and we will be steadfast in what we do.
Thank you.
If I could ask Mr. Dan Guy, Mr. Bill Davis, if you could please mute your microphones, as well as all the BGE folks. And Mr. Davis of Chop Tank, thank you. Seeing no additional questions, we will move on to the PHI utilities. Mr. Mike Hill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Doug Mike Heel here on behalf of Pepco and Delmarva Power. I have with me a team of folks that will answer any questions that you may have. Let me start at the beginning. Chairman Stanek, you asked about the outages. And currently, when I look at our outage maps, we have 53 customers out in Delmarva Power for Delmarva, Maryland, and 49 customers out in Pepco. We did have outages last night in both jurisdictions, but our teams are on those, and we've been able to generally restore all of the customers. So that's an update. And like BG&E, I do not believe that we will be filing a major outage report, as these storms were significant, but certainly not large enough to call in the need for a report for either Delmarva Power or Pepco. Turning to the reliability reports, first of all, echo what BG&E said and thank staff, engineers, and their teams for reviewing the reports. As the commission knows, both Pepco and Delmarva met all of the service quality and reliability standards. Would like to thank also Mr. Lowe for leading the Consumer Protection Work Group and Mr. Wilson for leading the Vegetation Management Cost Work Group. We certainly support the outcome, the consensus outcome of those work groups, and think we're going to get a better product as a result of those work groups. I guess the last question that you had opening, Mr. Chairman, you asked about diminishing returns or calling it a day. I think that the Pepco and Delmarva reliability plans are designed to continue to meet the commission's stringent standards. I don't think that we're doing things that are gold plating the system or beyond what's needed. I would echo what BG&E said, that these are averages and that there are small pockets that we also have to look at. And we also have to keep in mind that on our systems, we have aging infrastructure that needs to be replaced. And that, in my view, is not a dollar and cents thing when we have, poles that are 70, 50, 70 years old. They need to be replaced, and that work needs to be done. And I think that the spending that we're doing is designed to maintain the standards and allow us to meet the commission requirements. So with that, my team is here. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have. I don't have anything really to go into since we met all of the requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Mike Hill, and congratulations to Pepco for getting greens across the board. Do commissioners have questions? Seeing none, Thank you. We will move on to our Western utility, the Potomac Edison Company. Good morning, Mr. Trout.
With me this morning, presenting to you and taking your questions, Donald McGigan and David Bedard, whom you've heard from on these and related topics on a number of previous occasions. And I'm just going to turn it right over to them to begin the presentation, begin answering the questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Just to make sure if everyone can hear me.
Mr. Sears, loud and clear. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and commissioners, and we're happy to be here today to present, have some brief comments and then answer any questions that you may have. Dave, you want to go ahead to the, we just got a couple slides that we've prepared and we'll run through those and I'll start off and just basically briefly cover our 2020 performance. And again, we had a successful year, achieved our better than target in our reliability metrics. We exceeded our service restoration performance standards and also exceeded our customer communication standards. So if we could go to the next slide, Dave. Here's I won't read through all this. I will comment briefly on Chairman Stanek's couple questions. First of which on the weather of yesterday. The storms yesterday did not adversely impact our service territory from a Potomac Edison standpoint. You can see we've had a couple of major event day exclusions, but no major outage events for 2021 so far. Also, I'll mention that as we approach mid-year, we are in a good position to perform better than our reliability standards for 2021 as well. So while we've had some challenges with weather, it's going pretty good for this year so far. I'm gonna move ahead, Dave. And then here you can see our service restoration performance levels. And then finally on the next slide, we have our customer satisfaction performance levels. Before I turn it over to Don to cover our action plan and some other items, the other question, Mr. Chairman, you asked in regards to the current reliability standards and maintaining. Ours are flat through the 2024 year with the current period, and we believe that the current level of service reliability standards represent the greatest value from a reliability standpoint versus cost standpoint for our customers. And I believe Don will touch a little bit on a work group and our support of that with staff throughout the remainder of the presentation, but I wanted to answer that as well. And with that, I'll turn things over to Don. He's got a couple things to cover, and then we're happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Jim. So as was already covered and John touched on it, Chief Burkowski earlier, we did have the correction action plan from last year. And the major part of that was transitioning from a 5-year to a 4-year trim cycle in Maryland. So we did begin that January of this year. And at this point, we're off to a good start. We have the mileage completed that we would expect to complete so far this year. And we're able to increase the crewing of our contractors as we would need to. And in today's environment, that was not an easy task, but we were able to do that in we think a cost-effective way. And of course, we continue to implement the reliability programs under the EBIS surcharge program through 2022. Slide, Dave. The commission ordered last year's report that we file an updated major outage event plan. So that was filed at the end of the year. And that plan did add several lessons learned from prior events that were included in that. And I believe in staff's report, they noted when that was accepted by the commission. As Chief Burkowski talked about, we did have a porous performing feeder failure The Little Orleans circuit was on the list 3 consecutive years. A little bit of characteristics about that. It's a little over 23 miles in length, serves just 335 customers. Those customers are either in Washington or Allegheny County. So this circuit serves sort of the border area between those two counties down near the Potomac River. So a very rural area for us. Largest challenges with the circuit are the terrain. A lot of it's off-road. It's all single phase, and there are no other circuits in the area. You can see listed at the bottom of the slide there, trees were the majority cause for each of the 3 years. Some of the prior remediation efforts that we did on that was normal scheduled tree trimming. We did off right-of-way tree, danger tree removal projects and circuit inspections, and then of course completing anything we found. We also looked for more aggressive solutions over the last couple of years as far as SCADA control switches or any DA opportunities, and then even the energy storage project, as you will recall, we tried to address this circuit. Because of the remoteness, some of those just weren't possible. For instance, there's no cell phone coverage that's reliable down that area that you're going to use with for communication with devices you would put out. So the corrective action plan that we came up was to underground 2 sections of that feeder. There's about 3,000 feet in Washington County on the one section and about 2,000 feet in Allegheny County on the other section. That should address, those sections will address the majority of the tree issues that we've had. There are a few tree issues on other portions of the circuit, but most of them will be captured by those 2 sections. Then just some of the comments from the reports from the other parties. We have reviewed the comments from staff OPC in Montgomery County. We do support staff's recommendations to require the utilities to report on the 2.5 beta method in the next cycle. We do believe we should begin working on the standards next year. And we do support, as a lot of the discussion has been had already, with looking at the RM43 standards. And then the customer perception survey and the vegetation management work groups, we do agree that they have fulfilled the needs of those groups. OPC recommended stress testing of the control center processes and outage management data. We believe those happen in real life as we have storms. And for Potomac Edison, since we are part of the First Energy and we share systems, it's not just storms in Maryland. It could be storms in our other states that help us test those systems as well. And with our West Jefferson substation, OPC commented about the savings from that project. And it appears they misinterpreted the data that we provided. There's 5,500 customers that are fed from that project. And those customers would see 160 minutes per year, we believe, on average savings from that project. The 3.3 minutes is then if you take those savings and apply them to our complete Maryland SAIDI, is where that savings would be. So I think it was just a misinterpretation of the data. OPC also asked to establish a working group to develop transparent distribution planning, capital budgeting process. And as we previously addressed in public conference number 44, which was filed March 11th, due to the complexity of the distribution system, we believe the electric distribution companies have the responsibility and control of that planning and project development and budget allocations. OPC also asked about customers willing to pay for various levels of reliability improvement. And we think the customer perception survey that we're about to do should help answer that question. And speaking of the survey, we did participate as ordered. And next steps for us will be to align our survey with the Appendix A and the final report, conduct the survey in the fourth quarter of this year. And then, as Mr. Lowe indicated, file the results of that report in the spring of 2022. I think that brings us to the question phase.
Thank you, Mr. Again, and Mr. Sears. We've heard a lot about the Little Orleans line over the past year or so. So hopefully, I think we have your word that we won't hear from them again, or God forbid, see a third problematic report with the feeder next year. So thank you for the presentation. I'll turn to my colleagues to see if they have any questions regarding your submission. And I see no questions. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll now turn to the representatives from the Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative. Good morning, Mr. McDougall.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Mark McDougall on behalf of SMECO. With me today are Chris Norton, Herb Regal, and Tammy Gardner. Mr. Norton has some comments that he'd like to provide the Commission, and he'll also be able to speak on the outages that SMECO had as a result of the storms last evening. So I'd like to now turn it over to Mr. Norton. Well, he is on the phone here somewhere, but I don't see him popping up here.
Yeah, Mr. McDougall, I don't see him on the matrix here. He may not be in the meeting.
I was just told he was in a meeting. He was at a, like Commissioner O'Donnell and Commissioner Herman, he is sharing a phone with two other, with both Mr. Regal and Ms. Gardner. So are either one of them on the line? I see Mr. Norton is showing up on my screen. His name is.
And he appears to have tried to unmute himself, perhaps unsuccessfully, though.
Commissioner, would it be possible to move on to Chop Tank and then let me contact Mr. Norton and see whether or not he is able to get on to the call today?
Let's do that. Ms. Dahl,
very much.
are you ready to represent the cooperative? Or Ms. Troutman? Well, I see we have a number of Chop Tank representatives with us.
Just a second, let me step over and make sure that she's available.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman. This is Tiffany Troutman from Chop Tank Electric, Manager of Finance and Regulatory Affairs. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Troutman, loud and clear. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. There we go.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. With me today is Leroy Sverduk, who is our VP of Engineering Services, Brian Hall, our Vegetation Management Coordinator, Thomas Tyndall, our VP of Member Services, and Bill Davis, our Supervisor of our Member Service Center. Chop Tank met all of its service quality and reliability standards. We do not have a formal presentation, but we're available for questions. And before we move on to any questions, I do want to report on our storm outages last night. We experienced about 150 storm-related outages due to last night's storm, all of which have been restored.
That's great news. Thank you for the update, Ms. Troutman. So, Mr. Sverduk, sorry if I botched your name, Sverduk, is that right?
Sverduk.
The floor is yours. Good morning.
Chairman, we don't have any formal presentation. We just have members of staff available for any questions.
Thank you. I was putting him on the spot. Let's see if you have questions. And this will be your last appearance. So we can ask now or forever hold your peace. I see no questions from my colleagues. And you had green all across the boxes. So Ms. Troutman, congratulations on that. I did notice that there appeared to be a large number of elective tree trimming and removal that was conducted in calendar year 2020. Can you provide any more flavor or color as to why that occurred, the additional voluntary tree trimming?
Well, you're correct, Chairman. We did have an increase in unscheduled work such as right-of-way clearing projects that did not fit into the criteria of the annual report mileage. And these were hotspot tree trimming. And I will go ahead and pass that along to Mr. Hall, and he can provide you some more details on some of that other trimming.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, are you with us?
Mr. Hall is on the line.
Well, perhaps if I have any additional questions, I could ask offline. I recognize that some of the tree trimming was for areas other than right-of-ways, and perhaps that resulted in some of the increase in cost. Okay, seeing no questions from my colleagues, we'll let the Chop Tank folks depart at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. McDougall, did that buy you enough time?
Perhaps, Mr. Chairman. We seem to be having some technical difficulties from our engineering and operations department, but I've been told that Mr. Norton is now available via audio, so while it not video, and can provide comments. So, Mr. Norton?
Can you hear us now?
We can. Yes, thank you.
Sorry for the technical problem. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm happy to report that we had no outage-related activity last from the storm. I'm not sure if that just bypassed us or hit areas that are a little more resilient than others, but we really had no activity. With regard to the annual performance report, staff's review of SMECO's 2020 annual performance report service reliability was a fair assessment of SMECO's reliability performance. SMECO met all of the established service quality and reliability standards, with the exception of completing all of the required periodic equipment inspections. SMECO missed the inspection of 44 hydraulic reclosers at 15 locations. These devices were scheduled to be replaced with electronic vacuum interrupt closures. Late in 2019, identified a battery performance with devices. A firmware update was needed to improve the battery life, and actually we're working under additional updates. SMECO stopped the planned replacement activities until the firmware issue was resolved, and implementation of the firmware update delayed due in part to travel restrictions for the vendor due to the pandemic. 30 of the 44 units have been completed. The remaining 14 units are at 5 locations, completed by the end of June. We've also made some process changes to create a greater visibility of the inspections coming due on these devices. And we look at some alternate devices as well. There's a Siemens unit that we looked at and had similar battery issues. And ultimately, the way we resolved this was to continue replacing with hydraulic reclosers. And we did experience a delay in receiving some of this equipment. in part due to the pandemic. Again, delivery times on these devices are limited. And that's the reason why the remaining units haven't been completed. We're waiting for another delivery that's supposed to be due this week. We feel that discussing the inspection topic was worthwhile this morning. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Begin with my colleague. And might have a mic issue here. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Norton, I want to explore, because you heard my earlier discussion, and I appreciate that, regarding periodic inspections and the importance of them, in my view. So you knew in 2019 that your replacement schedule of these reclosers may be in jeopardy, right? Mr. Norton?
Yes, sir, we did. We knew we had an issue with time, and actually that's why the process change I mentioned, and the responsibility for identifying what was required to be inspected or replaced in our case, because we usually take these down and put up new ones and then test the old ones, was a responsibility of the group that did the test. Part of what we've done is we've moved that responsibility to the group that actually does the install and replacing it. So it gives us a better view of what's available or the work that needs to be done, as opposed to just the testing itself.
But if you knew your replacement was, I'm sorry, we're getting a very bad echo here.
Commissioner O'Donnell, it appears from our central dispatch that Mr. Norton's phone is the cause of that echo. So, Mr. Norton, if you could just stay on mute when Commissioner O'Donnell's speaking, and mute yourself when you're not speaking, that'll fix the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But when you knew that your replacement schedule was in jeopardy, doesn't the periodic inspection become more important to complete? Not less important, because you're at the end of life. You're replacing these things for a reason, because they're suspect in their ability to operate. Doesn't that periodic inspection become heightened in importance to complete, not lessened in importance to complete, because you're going to replace them anyway? Doesn't that inspection become more important to get done?
I understand your, and yes, we took a conscious look at those. We didn't feel there was an issue. There's a margin in the time that do inspections. We have a 5-year cycle. The reality is there's probably some additional time to do that. We were off probably, well, in the end, we'll be off by about 6 months.
Yeah, but you didn't meet your COMAR. You meet the COMAR standard.
That's correct.
But there seems to be a laissez-faire. I fail to understand.
This is Herb Riegel from Smecco's Engineering. I might try to add one piece of this to the question at hand. When we did realize that there was a software issue.
Mr. Norton, okay, hold on. Mr. Norton, we're going to need you on mute. There we go. Please proceed. Sorry for the interruption.
Same location. Herb is in the same location, sir.
Commissioner, can you hear Smecco?
Yes.
An additional piece of information back in 2019, when our original electric recloser had their firmware review, reach out, and we did have plans and implemented a pilot project with an alternate vendor's device and installed several of those units into the field. And unfortunately, we found a similar software issue with the second vendor. Well, we abandoned the plan, and we were optimistic that the alternate vendor would have helped us to address our pending maintenance schedule issue. And when we found the second vendor also had issues, at that time we resolved to go back to a like-for-like old-style hydraulic replacement unit. And due to COVID and some delivery delays, we did have an issue getting the units in a timely fashion. As Mr. Norton had mentioned, we knew there is some inherent safety margin built into our conservative test cycle, so that we were confident that within a reasonable amount of time, we would have been able to replace those remaining units. As today, there's only 5 locations remaining where they need to be addressed, and they will be addressed within the upcoming 2 weeks.
I appreciate that. However, and I'm speaking haltingly because of the audio problems, so now it seems to be gone. Did the company consider coming up with a contingency plan to redouble its efforts to get the inspections done when it knew in as early as 2019 it was probably not going to get through with the replacements in time? Notwithstanding your conservatism built into your periodic inspections, you still have a commitment as a Maryland utility to meet the COMAR standards. And I keep hearing this repeated in my ears. We're good to go, no big deal. And I fail to understand that. It is a big deal. Please help me understand why I keep hearing it's not a big deal.
Mr. O'Donnell, you are correct. It is a big deal, and SMEC has always worked to address this issue. And our initial attempt was replacements with one vendor's electronic product, which is a state-of-the-art product. When that product failed, we go as our plan. We proceeded down that path, and unfortunately found that there were also issues with the third prong approach we had was to go back to the lack for the style hydraulic unit, and we did this to install in a timely fashion, but again, limitation, constraints, and distribution delays further hit us. As Mr. Norton had commented on earlier in his discussions, we have proactively looked and implemented improved internally, whereby we have a more visual transparent view of pending units due tests, and which are now apparent between the test group, construction group, and engineering group. We do take our test very seriously. This was a fortunate situation. We were trying to replace old technology with new technology to make improvements, and unfortunately that backfired on us. And I guess it's a perfect storm of things, if you will, that unfortunately led to us getting into the situation. We do take it seriously. It is something that we are trying with the commission, and we did fess up and did make this known to the commission in a transparent fashion, and are proactively steps to ensure that it does not happen again in the future. That is maybe the best I can offer you, Mr. Commissioner, and hopefully that will address concerns and take note that SMEC seriously has made progress and prevent from happening.
Thank you for that. If you could mute. Thank you. Mr. McDougall, the last couple questions for you. Can you give me some assurance that the management team at SMECO takes the failure to meet this COMAR standard very, very seriously? And can you indicate for me why you didn't file a corrective action plan for failure to meet this standard?
You're on mute, Mr. McDougall.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I want to assure you that not only do we take this particular performance indices seriously, we take them all very seriously. My understanding was that SMECO staff, engineering staff, was in contact with the commission engineering staff, and that communication would constitute, I guess, a verbal corrective action plan. And our engineering staff thought that that would be sufficient and did not file a written one. If indeed that was an error, we as a company apologize for that. And if any situation requires a corrective action plan in the future, we will make sure that it is filed in writing.
Fair enough. Staff is recommending we approve the corrective action plan, but we don't have one before us. So that's why I asked my question. I don't have one to approve.
Well, I believe, Mr. Commissioner, that the action plan would be to complete the testing by the end of this month. And that is before you today.
I guess my view is, in as much as I'm tough on this, and I will continue to be, let there be no doubt in anybody's mind, if it's not in writing, it's not before me. So that's how I view it.
Thank you. Seeing no additional questions at this time, we'll take a recess until 11:45 a.m., at which point we'll hear from the state ratepayer advocate as well as Montgomery County. We'll be back at 11:45. Okay, we are prepared to go back on the record. On June 4th, 2021, we received responsive comments to the submissions of the utilities back in April. And we received two sets of comments, one from the Maryland Office of People's Counsel and one from the staff attorneys at the Montgomery County, Maryland County Attorney's Office. We'll begin with the presentation or comments from the OPC staff. Good morning, Mr. Hoover.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Fred Hoover, appearing on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. I'll make a few introductory remarks and then I'll turn it over to our formal presentation by our two consultants. We're happy to see that the results of the efforts to establish and maintain service reliability for customers, which has become increasingly important due to the economic dislocations of the COVID pandemic, have created the situation where customers are more assured of reasonable service from outages. The commission, its staff, and the personnel of the utility should be congratulated for their efforts to establish the standards for reliability and meeting those standards of reliability as called for in the Maryland Electricity Service Quality and Reliability Act. But as the commission is aware, OPC has become increasingly concerned about the affordability of reliability investments in the last few years and the impact of the law of diminishing returns on reliability spending. Our concerns have been made increasingly clear both in this proceeding and our comments and in our recent testimony in both the BG&E and PEPCO multi-year rate cases. The Maryland Electricity Service Quality and Reliability Act establishes a state goal of ensuring that electric companies provide customers with high levels of service quality and reliability in a cost-effective manner. Now, OPC is not against strong reliability performance or reliability spending. Our priority is to ensure that reliability spending is limited to that which delivers the greatest bang for the buck for the state's economy. At some point, the rate increases from reliability spending will exceed the economic benefits of the improved reliability. While we do not know precisely where that point is today, we are likely close to that point if we haven't already reached it. OPC believes that more data is needed to understand where the optimum balance lies. Achieving the right balance of reliability spending versus affordability is important because there are many needs for rate increases in the coming years to support important state policies, such as the increases related to beneficial electrification, including for the transportation system, increases to the distribution system to accommodate greater adoption of distributed energy resources. It's clear that we are going to need resources to address important state energy and environmental goals in the future. These changing priorities may require large capital investments, so OPC encourages the commission to consider high reliability as just one objective for the electric grids, which serve the Maryland consumers in the 21st century. Electricity affordability for the state's ratepayers is another objective. The challenge for the commission, utilities, and stakeholders will be to balance competing priorities as the number of objectives for the electric grid will need to meet grows. In order to control the amount of rate increases on the state's economy and its consumers, we must take care to optimize overall grid spending if we hope to maintain affordability. Reliability is just one of the many priorities. We see rate increases as a precious resource which should be conserved and utilized only as needed. To summarize, the state's economy and consumers cannot afford everything the utilities might want to pursue. OPC believes that the goal of grid investments must be prioritized as a way to, and one way to evaluate these investments is to increase stakeholder participation in the prioritization of what is spent on modernizing the grid. Now, I would like to make one comment in reference to one of the comments that was made by one of the folks on behalf of Potomac Edison, and that's on this issue of trying to determine what consumers might be willing to pay in order to provide for greater reliability. And the suggestion was made to use the consumer surveys, which is part of the report that was proposed earlier by staff. It's our concern that the use of those surveys is really an inadequate mechanism to determine what customers would be willing to pay for what level of reliability. And it's the reason why in our comments that we filed earlier, we make the specific recommendation that the commission authorize staff to engage a market researcher to conduct what's known as focus groups. That way you can get the type of information that you probably will be able to use in order to make the determination as to what the customer is willing to bear for the level of reliability. The use of the surveys that ask a large number of questions on a variety of topics is going to require a fair amount of pre-education for the consumer on what's really related to the reliability concerns versus the cost impacts. And my concern is that without that kind of pre-education, which is going to be difficult to do in a long extended survey of customers that ask about a lot of issues, the answer you're going to get is going to be uninformed at best and probably based on what just happened to them the night before when it comes to service reliability. So with that perspective, I'd like to turn it over now to our two consultants, Paul Alvarez, who is the president of the Wired Group, a consultant group that focuses on determining the best bang for the buck for distribution investments, and Dennis Stevens, who's the Wired Group's senior technical consultant with many years of experience in distribution planning, operations, asset management, and performance measurements for XL Energy, a significant investor-owned utility in Colorado. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Alvarez for our presentation.
Thank you, Fred. Molly, can you, or staff, if you could pull up the presentation. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, if you could turn to the first slide, please. Our real intention here is just to kind of summarize what we talked about in the LPC's comments and provide opportunities for questions. So if you care to ask your questions as you go, that's fine as well. We prefer, you know, informal while you're thinking of it types of questions if you care to. So first of all, as acknowledged already, we'll talk about the performance so far. Really excellent. The staff and commission are to be commended. I think as we see it, many commissions could really benefit from what you all have accomplished in Maryland. We'll talk briefly about some of the utility action plans and technologies that we see that have been reported and that we've seen in some of the recent rate cases. We're going to put the targets and performance in perspective by comparing to U.S. utility averages. We'll present some of those charts from our comments. We have some questions we think we need to have answered, and we'll talk about those as Fred alluded to. Willingness to pay is certainly one of those, and then finally our recommendations. So thank you, Molly. As you can see here, excellent progress, whereas most utilities in the U.S. are actually deteriorating somewhat in reliability performance. The Maryland utilities have improved significantly and in fact reached new highs as we can tell from the 2020 performance reports. We want to talk a little bit about some of the technologies and actions that the utilities are taking to get here. Some of which we feel are worth the money, and others maybe not worth the money. So Dennis, maybe you'd like to take us through, Molly, next slide, please. Some of those technologies and your take, Dennis, on some of these technologies.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm just going to I'm trying to kind of summarize my comments or from our comments with regard to these particular technologies or approaches to reducing cost. First, I want to talk about 4 kV elimination. BGE justifies 4 kV conversions based on reliability, operational, environmental, and safety benefits. However, from the data collected in discovery, the reliability of BGE's 4 kV system, SAFE and SAVE, has actually been better than BGE's system-wide reliability in recent years, 2015 through 2018. BGE provided no quantified estimate of reliability improvements for any 4 kV conversion projects proposed in its electric distribution plan. Regarding claims that 4 kV conversions provide operational benefits, I am aware that 4 kV systems can be inconvenient for field personnel, grid operators, and electrical engineers who must consider the differences between these two systems in their work. However, I have never seen a single headcount reduction resulting from 4 kV conversions. BGE also implies that 4 kV lines are unsuitable for upgrades to a smarter grid, though BGE admitted in discovery that distribution automation and remote monitoring and control are available for 4 kV equipment. Regarding environmental benefits, BGE's testimony implies that 4 kV lines inhibit rooftop solar installation. BGE admitted in discovery that 4 kV lines are no less able to accommodate rooftop solar on a relative basis, as defined as a solar capacity relative to load, than any other voltage line. Regarding reduced safety, BGE provided no safety incident data in discovery indicating that its 4 kV lines were any less safe than the 13 kV lines. In fact, the power of dangerous flashovers is less on 4 kV lines than it is on 13 kV lines. And so they also provided no benefit cost analysis of 4 kV conversions when requested in discovery. And so it's my opinion that unless you are replacing 4 kV because it's overloaded, then I don't think you should be replacing it. And I do agree with them that when you're replacing 4 kV, you should replace it with 13 kV. So let me talk a little bit about prospective substation equipment replacement. So BGE substation transformer replacement program is an excellent example of what I call prospective asset replacement. Prospective asset replacement is the replacement of assets with zero book value, but which are operating safely and reliably in the absence of objective justifications for such replacement. Objective justifications includes such as equipment test results, formal equipment inspection results, or historical outage failures which indicate a particular piece of equipment should be replaced. Replacing equipment based on objective justifications is appropriate as it avoids failures in service or service interruptions and thereby improves reliability. However, replacing equipment simply because it is old is not appropriate. And in my experience, this is not standard industry practice. I would point out that the age is a terrible predictor for substation transformer failure. In discovery, BGE revealed that the oldest substation transformer presently operating safely and reliably in their system is 79 years old, which just indicates that transformers can last a long time. Other information obtained in discovery indicates that BGE uses maintenance history and design obsolescence to replace transformers. These are not objective indicators of impending substation transformer failure. This is precisely the role of dissolved gas analysis of transformer oil. It provides objective data on the health of the substation transformer. And as just kind of relaying back to Commissioner O'Donnell's question about equipment testing, this testing approach is a proven approach and is used widely in the industry to make decisions for replacing transformers and also for replacing circuit breakers. And if you're using that approach, then no subjective condition assessments are necessary. To me, this indicates the program will eventually replace, that this approach that BGE is using will eventually replace all substation transformers regardless of objective test results. This can deprive customers of decades of useful life of transformers for which they have already paid and which are delivering electricity safely and reliably. I recommend that BGE continue its industry standards substation asset testing program, replacing the equipment identified as likely to fail through objective test results regardless of age. So now let's move on to cable replacement. BGE uses a typical 3 strikes and you're out approach to underground cable replacement. This is basically saying when the cable fails 3 times, then we're going to replace that segment. And he calls that program reactive cable replacement, which I don't necessarily disagree with. However, the associated construction policy that BGE uses often results in replacement of sections on either side of the failed cable section, even if these sections of cable have never failed, which can triple the replacement cost. BGE's planned cable replacement program, unlike the reactive cable replacement program, is not based on historical failure rates of specific cable sections. Instead, the program is intended to identify types of cable exhibiting certain failure rates and then proceeds to replace 100% of that cable type, regardless of section-specific performance. I appreciate that certain types of underground cable are poor performance, and I have extensive experience in dealing with several of those types of cable. But even poor performing cable types exhibit a wide variation in failure rates depending on location-specific conditions. Rocky terrain, wet terrain, all of those conditions have a very big impact on the failure rates of the specific types of cables. BGE provided no benefit cost analysis, which indicates that prospective replacement of some cable types delivers reliability benefits to customers in excess of the incremental cost. I recommend that they concentrate more on replacing cable segments that have failed by maybe reducing the number of failures from 3 to say 2 and replacing those specific cables that have proven to be faulty rather than cables that might sometime in the future become faulty. And then my last, I want to talk a little bit about trip savers. The idea behind the trip saver is that they improve reliability because unlike fuse, they can reset themselves. Most utilities set trip saver devices to reset themselves 3 times in succession. That is, and after the 3rd attempt of a fault persists, the trip saver trips and remains tripped just like a fuse. This is called locking out. Like many utilities, Pepco installs fuses at the points where lateral lines, which generally serve 30 to 50 homes, tap into a main circuit. So when a trip saver prevents a temporary fault from becoming a sustained outage, it can save 30 to 50 customers from an outage. The problem is that the trip savers are disproportionately costly relative to the reliability risk reduction they offer. As of 2020, Pepco had installed 146 trip savers in Maryland at an average cost of $15,000 each for a total cost of $2.2 million. Since the program's inception in 2015, these trip savers have tripped 140 times and locked out 129 times, just like a fuse would have. It needs to be recognized that because the device tripped 140 times without a lockout does not mean that 140 outages would have been avoided. There are several reasons for this. First, as I mentioned, trip savers will trip 3 times prior to actually locking out. That means that many of these counts may have led up to an actual lockout. Secondly, even fuses have a fuse curve which allows the fuse to ride through some initial faults without the fuse blowing. This means it could have rode through a fault just like a trip saver did. And finally, there is a protection scheme which allows a fast trip on the upstream device like a breaker or recloser, which could have allowed the fuse to avoid the initial fault. I calculated that trip savers went to lockout on average 25 times per year, which is almost the same as the number of fuses that blew per year on the Pepco system, which was about 35 per year. Therefore, in my opinion, these devices do not deliver value to ratepayers in excess of cost to ratepayers. I also, when we talk about standard action time, we certainly agree that distribution automation can be effective in improving reliability on a distribution system. However, it should be automation should be applied sparingly, and benefit cost analysis should also be applied to the application of distribution automation when applying to the system. In other words, you don't just apply it in a blanket across the whole system. You need to apply it on worst performing feeders or places where it has the most, is mostly cost effective. And then of course, vegetation management should be on like a 4-year cycle, because that is the biggest way to prevent or improve reliability on a distribution system, is through proper vegetation management. Finally, I would just point out that they did not talk about their 69 kV rebuild system rebuilds on their in their plan, but that was a $650 million project, and in our comments and in the original testimony, we pointed out that this was a very that the cost of this program was not justified in the value to ratepayers. With that, if there's questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'll turn this over to Paul to continue with our presentation.
All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a couple quick comments here on the targets and the performance and how it compares to U.S. utility averages. Just want to help you understand what this chart does. Below the green dotted line is top decile performance. Below the purple dashed line is top quartile. Between the purple dashed line and the blue solid line is second quartile. The blue solid line being the median, right? So half the utilities perform above that and half below. Between the blue and double orange lines is third quartile, and above the double orange line, you know, the highest safety would be fourth quartile. So as you can see, all the utilities are performing pretty much in top quartile or better. Certainly no one below the median, which is of course great news. Also notice that the targets in general are pretty reasonable. I think note that the nonprofit utilities really don't need, I would argue, any less stringent maybe targets than you might otherwise assign to a for-profit utility. Next slide, please. You can see SAIDI, exact same kind of situation. Just let you grog that for a minute there. Okay, let's proceed to the questions that we have. There's no answers, easy answers to these, but I think really as we're struggling with now with, you know, how far, what's next with reliability in Maryland now that we've done a great job and kind of hit the top quartile, what's appropriate? What's the economic value of reliability improvements? We've been critical of this U.S. Department of Energy tool for a variety of reasons. Happy to take questions on that. Again, as Mr. Hoover mentioned, lots of things we can be spending our money on. You know, how do we balance reliability needs against other you know, state policy goals? Another thing we haven't really talked about too much is this fact that reliability benefits accrue disproportionately to commercial and industrial customers. And yet residential customers, you know, cost causation principles that they use on the cost allocations and rate setting mean that the residential customers are still paying half of that. So I think that requires a little bit more thought and consideration. Yes.
Can I interrupt you? I think you wanted
Yes.
questions.
Yes.
Who does OPC envision is going to pay for this market research, third-party market research? Ratepayers?
Well, I think that would be reasonable. I think to the extent that such research would help us better understand, what the right reliability decisions are and investment decisions are. I think it would be well worth it. But that's just my my perspective. Fred, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yes, I think, we'd be willing to see that covered by ratepayer expenses. I mean, I think it's an important enough issue, and I think the information that would be derived from the use of a reputable market researcher that was hired by staff, so that would be completely independent, is worth the investment.
Thank you. I know it's not inexpensive for a third-party independent market research, especially on a utility-wide basis. It could be substantial, but
One clarification on that. So our view is you would really need to do this on a statewide basis. You actually don't need to do this on a utility by utility basis, because the types of issues and the types of questions we're looking to get answers to, while the state is different and has different perspectives on things, I think they're fundamental enough that you could deal with one focus group to answer these questions and get reliable information. You do not need a separate focus group for each utility.
when you say focus group, how many customers are you envisioning in this group?
Well, I mean, I've had some experience with dealing with focus groups, and it's not a huge number of people if it's done right. I might defer actually to Paul to do a little more explanation about how this market research activity takes place, but we're not talking about, a vast number of people that would be involved in this.
Okay, then thank you. My question was really who pays, so appreciate your response there.
Yeah, and I wouldn't limit it necessarily to a focus group. In my experience, the way they typically do it is they start with a survey and they kind of narrow it down to issues, and then they put together a focus group to kind of explore, additionally, qualitatively, what the survey instrument seems to be telling them. So it's probably a combination, but again, leave it to the experts. And I would agree, you don't need six different ones for each utility. You do it once for the state. And that's true of our other data requests too, which is the valuation of reliability improvements. So I think that also could be done once for the entire state. But
Mr. Chair, may I just ask one question, just to follow up on the chairman's question? Mr. Hoover, I heard your discussion on why the new survey or the potential new survey may have some inadequacies or raise some difficulties. But if we move forward with these recommendations, the customer perception work group recommendations, this would represent, I think, a significant improvement in our survey process and really get into some of these new questions. Would there be any way to maybe to improve upon this? So again, we don't have two competing at this point, forums going on, trying to gather. I think I agree with you. It's very important information, but the survey that is envisioned would have a section on reliability value theme and willingness to pay themes. So it seems like we're attempting to try to get this important information without necessarily duplicating it in another form. So I heard your earlier discussion on this, but is there something you could recommend? Maybe we could just improve this survey that is mentioned.
Sure. So there's two concerns that I have. One, as I mentioned, my initial concern is that without a level of sort of pre-education on reliability standards and sort of how costs are determined for utility, the type of response you're going to get from the customer is really going to be kind of off the top of their head. But the second part is, even if you engage in that education part to try to get the customer more comfortable with the facets of the reliability and reliability spending, then I'm concerned about sort of who's doing the education and how it's being done. So that's one of the reasons why my thought is to have an independent entity do this that's controlled by staff, works for staff, reports to staff, as opposed to, and not to besmirch the utilities' intentions or anything like that, but not to have the information sort of clouded or shaded by the utilities providing that education information and background information on what the issues are about when we're trying to get this answer.
Okay. And there's nothing you think we could do with this survey? I mean, perhaps give an opportunity for OPC and staff to be more involved in its development and have a chance to I guess, oversee. I'm just looking for ways to see if we, instead of duplicating, if we could use this potentially new survey to again, get this important information.
Well, I mean, I actually participated in the work group that developed the report that you got on the consumer surveys, and actually raised a number of questions about this concern of the ability to get an informed response from customers via this particular survey instrument on this issue of what is somebody willing to pay. And maybe the report's not as clear on that, but there seemed to be, I won't speak for the utilities, but there was, some concern about, there are limits as to how much you could really find out using the type of survey that's being envisioned in this, which covers a multitude of issues and trying to get the participation of customers on that kind of survey. But again, there's this problem of the lack of background information that they have on this fairly critical issue, sort of limits how much use you can get out of that particular survey instrument.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate that answer.
If I could just add, as a somebody with market research, experience, that there is definitely a limit to what you can gather in a single survey instrument, and I think the amount of information you'd have to cover to get something of value, to make, to give you something you could use in making decisions on these issues, is going to take more than you can squeeze in. Honestly, I think you want to know. Well, for example, what would you pay for a 10% improvement in reliability? You have to interpret that for customers a little bit, right? They don't know what is 10%. Well, it's 10 minutes or 8 minutes a year or what have you. Those types of issues have to be explored and explained, right? And so it's difficult to get that. And what would you pay for that? What would you pay for 20%? What would you pay for 30%? And different customer classes, residential, small business, C&I. It's a big issue and a big challenge, and a specific area of market research that I think requires, some specific attention and not just trying to squeeze it in. Another alternative might be to remove it. I understand your concern about duplication, which I think is valid. Maybe one idea is to remove it from or deprioritize it certainly from your existing customer perspective research, and therefore get to other things in that research that you care to, and leave this for a separate effort would be one idea. Okay. Anything else from any of the commissioners?
Alvarez, was there anything else on this slide that you didn't cover?
No, just I think we've done a good job on this one, and certainly the role stakeholders should play. So let's go to the recommendations, please, Molly. So again, as you heard or have heard from OPC, we believe stakeholder participation and transparency is critical to distribution planning and capital budgeting. We do not necessarily disagree with Potomac Edison, and I think we've covered this in previous proceedings, that the utility must also always have the choice or ultimate, authority on what investments they feel they have to make to maintain reliability. But those decisions have to be justified, and I think there's enough what would you call it, leeway, and Dennis, address some of these, and subject to interpretation and prioritization, right? There's so many things we could spend money on. It just seems like there's no other way to make some of these prioritizations going forward without some stakeholder input. So enough on that. Certainly we're happy to take questions. We talked about the need for research. We talked about willingness to pay already, but I'd also like to spend some time again on the economic value of reliability improvements. We feel that's a separate research effort, that it would be extensive, but again, valuable. When you're making decisions in hundreds of millions of dollars, we believe it does make sense to get a really good handle on what the service territory-wide or community-wide value of reliability improvements are, and we don't think the existing tool really gives you that. And finally, the law of diminishing returns and where we are, as we talked about. That's it from us. Happy for more questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners? Thank you to the Office of People's Counsel. We'll next turn to Montgomery County, Maryland. Ms. Brennan, are you with us? Hi.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Lisa Brennan, Associate County Attorney for Montgomery County, Maryland. With me today is Laura Miller, Forest Conservation Coordinator for Montgomery County's Department of Environmental Protection. Ms. Miller has been participating in the meetings of the Maryland Electric Reliability Tree Trimming Council, the MERT Council, on behalf of the county, and she also participated in the recent customer perception work group. Montgomery County filed comments focusing on BGE, Potomac Edison, and Pepco, the 3 electric utilities that serve Montgomery County, as we've done previously. I don't have a formal presentation, but I'll just highlight a few points from our comments, and then we'll be happy to take any questions from the Commission. As has been discussed today, all 3 utilities are generally in compliance with the service quality and reliability standards adopted by the Commission in RM 43. And Montgomery County greatly appreciates that reliability on the system has improved since those standards went into effect. I'd like to highlight a couple of specific positive points from this year's reports. As has been noted, Pepco and BGE's performance for 2020 is in the first quartile for both SAIDI and SAIFI, and Potomac Edison is in the second quartile for both. The county also appreciates the performance on the new downed wire standard. All 3 utilities met the new 3-hour standards for the first full year that it went into effect. And we'd like to thank the Commission and the utilities for their participation in the amending of those standards. But there are a few metrics that highlight how individual customers experience outages, especially those customers who are experiencing a seemingly higher number of outages than their neighbors. These are highlighted in the poorest performing feeder reports, the multiple device activations, CAIDI and SEMI, as has been discussed. We appreciate BGE and Pepco discussing today that they're addressing these small pockets of customers, and would urge the Commission to consider that going forward. Also, there's still some issues that we've highlighted in our comments about special medical needs facilities, and we appreciate the Commission's continued attention to those issues as well. I don't want to go over all of our comments. I don't want to repeat things that have already been said here today. So we're happy to answer any questions. As I said, Ms. Miller is here in case there's any questions about vegetation management.
Thank you, Ms. Brennan, for those comments and for highlighting a few of those very narrow concerns with respect to items that the Commission should keep an eye on, including communication to particular vulnerable customers. As I said at the outset, it's a balance between how much more do we want to spend to reach additional customers, fewer customers. But I also recognize that the burden of outages aren't shared equally across the board. Some folks experience many more outages and others don't experience any. Thank you for being here today. Any questions from commissioners? Seeing no questions from Montgomery County, thank you. Oh, Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one question for Ms. Brennan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
So we've heard a number of parties talk today about the interest of getting more feedback from consumers to determine how much more reliability would be valuable. Montgomery County has been participating in a number of proceedings before the commission over the years and had some challenges with the reliability many years ago. I'm curious as to what your response would be to the suggestion that we would either solicit a professional to conduct more, to obtain more information, or do you think that that we have enough already, or what would your thoughts be on that?
I'll admit I'm not an expert in that topic, so I haven't really considered the best way forward. I understand the need for more data. If the commission doesn't have enough information to make the determination about, what's the value of outages or the value of lack of outages for reliability purposes, then I can see the value of the suggestion to do some market research on that.
Okay, so consumers in Montgomery County, and at least over the years past, certainly have not had any reluctance in reaching out if there's a concern regarding reliability. So do you think that their response to a additional request for more information would their response be to expect a different type of standard of reliability, or just to understand its information sharing, or is there a type of education we have to do in order for people to understand what the result of a survey would be, or do you think everyone's already comfortable in understanding what the results should look like?
If I understand your question, I'm not sure that, customers aren't necessarily following all of these proceedings, so I'm not sure that all the customers understand what the ramifications were. I believe the example was, what is a 10% or 20% improvement in reliability? How many minutes does that actually equal? So perhaps an education campaign before surveys or in conjunction with the surveys. I don't know if that would make the surveys more complicated, but I think context is important for consumers. Some of the reliability issues in the past were largely brought to light because of some storms that happened, which sort of highlighted the issues. And we haven't had that recently. So I think that makes it less on people's radar. I think with working from home and as has been discussed, the electrification of vehicles, more customers buying EV cars, I think that's going to, circle back around to highlighting those issues for consumers.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Montgomery County certainly has had its share of challenges, but a lot of strong effort from the utility company and PEPCO, as well as a number of other parties to make sure that reliability was improved, helped to get it to where it is now. We've heard positive comments as a result of that improvement. So I was just curious as to if there was more expected or not, but I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, Ms. Brennan, I just wanted to ask, I did note that you highlighted again customer communications in your testimony, and while you acknowledged that the standards were met for answering calls, and you appreciate the new metrics, the fact that you highlight that there was some decline in areas, is that something that you're hearing from constituents in Montgomery County? Is there a concern that we should be aware of, and are we focusing on this metric enough?
I am not aware of any particular concerns. They have not been brought to my attention, although they may not necessarily get to me. I think one of the things that I acknowledged was that it could be sort of an outlier based on the COVID situation, and that I sort of wanted to highlight it so that we could be aware of it in case it does begin a trend. So I am not aware of any particular concerns, but it was just something that I thought worth noting based on, you know, how many of the metrics looked like there was some deterioration. And as I said, it may be COVID related, in which case I certainly hope that that's not the beginning of a downward trend. We would expect
Very
it not to
good.
be.
Well, thank you. I did note it, so I just wanted to ask the question. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Brennan. This concludes our hearing today. At this point, the commission will endeavor to prepare an order for issuance in the coming weeks, as we traditionally do with respect to our annual electric reliability hearing. Again, I want to thank the utilities, particularly for scoring high marks for the 2020 reporting year, and thank both OPC and Montgomery County for, as well as our staff, for reviewing the reports and providing us with timely feedback, which we will consider as we make our determination. With that, today's hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.